It's all about truth. All of it. Every single thing. All boils down to the truth. We all want truth. The truth will set you free. All right, welcome to the program, ladies and gentlemen. This is Press for Truth Live. I am your host, Dan Dix. Today is Tuesday, March the 1st, 2016, and we have a great show lined up for you. I'm really excited to get into this one. We've been on a little bit of a hiatus, I guess you could say. We've been away for the last week and a half. In case you didn't know, I was in Acapulco, Mexico, and we had quite the experience there. I had an opportunity to speak there at the world's largest anarchy conference, so got an opportunity to give a talk there, which went well. And then my friend and I, Luke Radowski and myself, put on a boot camp, a bit of a workshop there, an 8-hour course where we taught all the tricks of the trade, kind of showing people how it is that we do what we do. So that was fun. I absolutely love the Anarcho-Poco conference. It's not an easy one to say, though, but I can't wait to be back next year. But I'm glad to be back here in Canada because while I was gone, a lot of things happened. In fact, there was a groundbreaking case that's really potentially a precedent setter, and this is what we're going to be talking about today, is the Allard versus the Queen, essentially. We've just had a breakthrough win in this case for the right for medical cannabis users to be able to produce their own medicine here in Canada. So this is huge. And we're going to be joined in studio today by Jeremiah Vandermeer of Pot TV, and he's the editor-in-chief of Cannabis Culture magazine. So he's going to help us break down what the results of this Allard case means for the current patients here in Canada that get their medical cannabis, and also what this may mean for the future of cannabis users, whether it's recreational users or medicinal users or what have you, here in Canada moving forward as we inch towards legalization. Now, I'm going to show you a bit of a clip now from a press conference that was filmed by Jeremiah, and this is of John Conroy, the lawyer who's been on this case, giving a talk directly after the verdict was announced. So here's a little bit of a press conference of announcing the Allard decision and what this is going to mean. And when we come back from this clip, we're going to be joined here in studio by Jeremiah of Pot TV. So here's the press conference from earlier, and when we come back, we'll be here in studio with Jeremiah.
We're, of course, very pleased with the decision of the court. The court found that taking away people's ability, medically approved patients' ability to produce for themselves or have a caregiver do so for them, did in fact result in a violation of their constitutional rights under Section 7 of the Charter. The court found that the government's move with the MMPR in doing that was arbitrary and overbroad in going too far. So the MMPR has been struck down as unconstitutional, but following the protocols that exist in constitutional litigation, that declaration of unconstitutionality has been suspended for 6 months. So the MMPR continues for 6 months. The government has 6 months in order to fix it up. And so the government also has 30 days to appeal. The government that instructed the bringing of this, or the opposing of our lawsuit, is a different government than what existed or what exists today. The government that exists today has said publicly and put it in writing that it plans to legalize cannabis. So they've got 30 days to consider an appeal. Hopefully they'll see that pursuing an appeal is not what they should do, and they should immediately get to work trying to make sure that we have in place a reasonable process for patients to continue to produce or have true caregivers stand in their shoes and produce for them.
A reasonable process. That's that's what John's calling for, and I think it's quite reasonable to call for a reasonable process, really. And joining us now in studio is the one and only Jeremiah Vandermeer of Pot TV. Dude, thanks so much for taking time to come and join us here in studio today.
Thanks for having me, man.
So you have been covering this extensively, all over this case, and you were actually at the court case, got some footage of the press conference.
Yeah.
What, wrap it up for us a little bit in a nutshell, what the results of the Allard case means, and what does it mean right now for the current medicinal users in Canada?
Well, this is a pivotal case. It's a really big win for our side. And what this really means is when the government changed, of course, for people who don't know, Canada has a medical marijuana program that we've had since 2000. There was an MMAR program, they called it MMAR, and this program included home growing for patients. They could actually grow at home. And over the years, there had been, it's been in the courts a few times for different things, but in just 2 years ago, in 2014, the government threw out the MMAR and brought in the MMPR. Now, in the MMPR, this was a new system that would make it basically banned for people to grow any kind of marijuana at home and put the power of growing into the hands of licensed producers, some large corporations, and basically would be forcing these people to go and get their medicine from these licensed producers instead of being able to grow it themselves.
And at this point, we're talking about roughly, about 30 to 40,000 patients?
That's right. It could be close to 40,000 patients this could affect that actually are designated to possess it, and I think it was a bit less than that have production licenses. But there's also over the years patients were allowed to have a designated producer produce for them as well. And there was some back and forth on how many people a designated producer could actually produce for. So we've seen a few court cases that kind of dealt with this issue before, including the recent Smith case, which actually does have a bearing in this case. This was about whether edibles should be allowed or not, or whether the government's insistence that people can't, it has to be dried marijuana instead of turning it into edibles or cookies or anything else like that. The government said that was dangerous for some reason. That was in the Smith case found to be unconstitutional. Yeah. So they have to be allowed to extract and make hash and other things like that.
Yeah, I want to find out how that plays into the Allard case, but that one still blows my mind, that Health Canada would suggest that you have to smoke your medicine and can't consume it via edibles.
It's not very logical, and that's kind of the case with a lot of these, what the government was putting forward in these different court cases. And the judge, thankfully in this case, really noted that a lot in his findings. He pointed out the fact that the government's case was really didn't make a lot of sense based on their expert witness testimony, and he even used language like shredded when he was referring to what the plaintiff did to the defendant. So now this is an interesting one. This is a charter challenge case. So none of the people in this case were arrested for marijuana or anything like that. These were patients who were upset about the new MMPR and started a challenge against, or basically it's a charter challenge. So it looks at the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And they said that in this case, or what the MMPR does is basically compromises two sections of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, Section 1 and Section 7. And the important one to the judge in this case was Section 7, and that's that everyone has the right to life, liberty, and security of the person, and the right not to be deprived thereof, except in accordance with the principles of fundamental justice. So what that means is that the government is allowed to infringe upon your right to life, liberty, and the security of the person if it follows the principles of fundamental justice. So in this case, the judge found that indeed the MMPR did infringe upon the rights of patients and did infringe upon their the liberty and security interest, was engaged, the judge said. And that's because in this case, by forcing patients to choose between growing at home or going to jail, because of, a lot of these patients, the reason that they grow at home is because the LP weed isn't good enough for them. It's not the kind of strain that they want, or it takes too long to get to their house, or there's 100 different reasons why you wouldn't want the LP weed instead of your own. It's too expensive. There's a lot of reasons. So
seems like the system that they had was working just fine for them. The people who managed to find their own DGs or grow it for themselves, they were quite comfortable with this, probably invested a lot of money.
Right. Well, the government argues that the MMAR was too expensive. And the judge actually agreed with them on that aspect of that there were prohibitive costs and that the MMPR was better in terms of how much it was costing the government. But that's the only thing that the judge found for on the side of the government, essentially. Right. Because of the infringement on so the way that the judge explains, I'll just read this part. The plaintiffs argued that the MMPR takes away the ability of the patient to produce cannabis for themselves, compelling them to purchase from an LP, whether or not the LP has an adequate supply or the required strains, and whether the patient can afford it. This places patients in the position of having to choose between their liberty and health in order to have access to an adequate supply of medicine. Yeah. So, if you really want good medicine, you're going to have to grow it yourself, and then you could be arrested. Right. And that's not fair, and that's not constitutional, according to the judge.
And apparently they're citing this danger of fire and mold, and it apparently being unsafe. But you said, in the judge's own language that he shredded that to pieces. Was that in regards to the fire and mold, and how did he break them apart on that?
Yeah, and now that's the important part here. So if the government is going to infringe upon your life, liberty, and security of your person, they have to do it according to these rules of fundamental justice. And what that really means is, if the government can prove that home growing is too dangerous for society, that it should be taken away from you, then they're okay to do it according to the law. But in this case, what they were saying was, yes, it's too dangerous for people to grow at home because of mold and fires. Right. And they brought these expert witnesses forward, including the Surrey Fire Chief Len Garris. Now, Len Garris is just a frothing anti-marijuana guy. Like, he just hates pot in every form. He's always in the media talking about that. And the judge pointed out that he was completely biased. And he also pointed out that he didn't present any valid evidence on whether or not it was the mold, the fire, or any of this. The government's evidence was extremely lacking. Egregious, according to the judge, was the testimony of the expert witnesses who were just essentially making things up. So the judge called them out directly, and not only, in the case itself, the lawyers on our side, John Conroy and some of his team, completely savaged the government guys. It was just brutal. The Crown got knocked on their ass in this case, and we all saw it when we were in court. Yeah. I was there tweeting about it, and some of the commentary back and forth was just hilarious. Yeah. And the judge himself was even noting some of this stuff at the time. Really? So we kind of, felt confident at the time that the judge was really paying attention to what was being said. Yeah. Because in other cases, it's not always like that, but...
Well, good on the judge. I got to give the guy kudos, because I wonder if it was luck of the draw, because sometimes I wonder if it comes down to the guy that you happen to get, and this seems to be a good judge who sees the absurdity of this situation.
Right. Justice Phelan was very of sound mind when he was judging on this one. He paid attention to all the evidence that was there. In some of the other cases, I've been critical of the judge's response that I've sat through court on. I was at one of them, at Malmo Levine's last one, and at Chris Bennett's, and the judges there were not as rational as this judge. So I was really impressed with his response. It's, basically everything that we wanted, we got. Now, but what that means is, what the judge actually did was throw out the MMPR completely. But he gives the government 6 months to change it. So he's suspending the judgment for 6 months while the government gets their shit together. I don't know if I can swear on the show. Okay. I swear on my show all the time. But, so he basically said the government has 6 months to change the system and come up with something new, and this one's going to be over with. And if there's nothing there at that time, the judge said that would be problematic, because then people can get arrested. He's thrown it out. At the same time, what he's done is extended the injunction. So before this court case happened, as part of the beginnings of this whole process, there was an injunction against the MMPR. And this was under a different judge, allowed the people who were growing at home to temporarily grow at home, or to continue to grow at home, as long as they stayed in the same address. And I believe there was a 150-gram limit on what people were actually allowed to possess. Okay. So that's when they're carrying, transporting, and doing that kind of stuff, I believe. I'm not sure if that relates directly to the people are under the MMAR allowed to have 30 times their daily amount on them. So there was problems with this lowering the limits, and also it was very problematic to have the addresses the same, and anybody who has moved or, got married, got moved to a new place, had a landslide, any of this stuff, they were not allowed to grow at home anymore. Right. So, but that was part of this injunction that stayed. At least the people who were were at the same address were allowed, and that's where we are now. Right. So the status quo remains for another 6 months. Okay. So people who are at the same address can grow at home still, but those people who have moved from their original MMAR, if it's not on that paperwork, they're not allowed to yet. So Conroy did say in his press conference that they're going to be fighting and looking at avenues to try and force the government's hand on this one, or allow those people. They're going to continue to appeal it, I guess, in whatever way they can.
So if the government has decided that, yeah, it's safe, yeah, it's clean, yeah, it's healthy, in fact, you can go ahead and continue to do this for 6 more months for the medical patients, what does that say about the recreational users? Or does this set a precedent for the future for people to be able to say, down the road when it's moving towards legalization, hey, patients are allowed to use this clean medicine, why can't I? I mean, could you see this as a potential precedent setter that could lead towards this acceleration towards legalization?
Well, I think the way that John Conroy, the lawyer, is looking at it is he hopes that it does, but it's kind of hard to say when it comes to this. What happens is the judge has thrown out the legislation that was there before, or the regulations that were there before. Of course, when it comes to, there's a big difference between legislation and regulation. Legislation is when it goes through the parliament and everything, the Senate and so on and so forth. The regulation is done by the government itself, and they can just change it however they want. It doesn't have to be voted on. So, and that's where we see Health Canada getting involved in doing this regulating. So now that the judge has thrown out the old regulations as unconstitutional, the government has to come back with new ones that are constitutional, according to the judge's findings. Right. But it's always a sneaky process when it comes to this, because the government can come forward with something that's just on the edge of being constitutional, or maybe it's not even constitutional, and then it will go back to court and be, either judged upon again if there's another case. So, but the government doesn't want to have to go back to court, of course. Right. So what Conroy and others would assume is that the government will be paying a lot of attention to the findings of the judge in this case, and they'll design the new system accordingly so that it doesn't have to go back to court on the same level here, right? They have to do it in the spirit of the judge's findings, or it could be problematic. Right. And so, yeah, in the press conference outside of when Conroy was announcing what was happening there, he said, I asked him this question about whether or not it could be, any of this stuff could be pushed forward into the recreational side. He said he hopes it is, and that the findings about growing, because they showed that there's no dangers associated with growing at home, it would be hard pressed for the government to put in a bunch of stuff saying, oh, it's too dangerous for people to grow at home. Right. That could go back to court and for the same reasons be found unconstitutional. Right. So we'll just have to see what the government comes up with.
Yeah. Well, the ironic thing about all of this is the government's now got 6 months to scramble to figure out what they're going to do. Meanwhile, this is a government who has gone in on a platform saying they're going to legalize marijuana, and they marched forward with that. And this is the government who we're dealing with now. Justin seems to be dragging his feet. We have an article here. Trudeau says he has no plans to decriminalize cannabis immediately. In an interview this morning with News 1130, Justin Trudeau said cannabis laws haven't changed yet, and he doesn't subscribe to the idea of decriminalizing immediately until a regulatory framework is in place. So a lot of people think that Justin is kind of dragging his feet a little bit. A little while back, he kind of threw his hands up in the air and said, oh, the international community is kind of preventing me, with the international treaties are blocking me from being able to do this. It's not me. It's out of my hands, I know I promised this, but it's not me. What are your thoughts right now on him kind of dragging his feet?
Well, he seems to be coming up with a lot of excuses recently, and these are excuses that the Justin before the election didn't really seem to be too concerned about. For instance, he did say before the election that he would be looking at granting pardons or overturning convictions related to this. And of course we have Bill Blair coming out saying that, no, they're not looking at, that's not on the table either. Right. So there's a lot of, promises that the Liberals have made in the run up to the election that they're now, dragging their feet on, as you said. Now, again, Trudeau did say he didn't want to decriminalize marijuana. He wanted to legalize it completely and set up a whole entirely new system. And that includes stricter regulations in some senses. They even said that in the language on their own Liberal webpage in their the blurb about marijuana.
Right.
But so we know that, this is a bigger system than just decriminalization, but there's a lot that can be done right away to stop people from being imprisoned or going through the court system and all the money spent on prosecuting these people and arresting them and everything else. We're wasting a lot of resources. There could be a moratorium on arrest that's put on right away, so that nobody, as Thomas Mulcair recently said, nobody should have to go to prison for this or be arrested for it if we're going to be legalizing it just down the road. It doesn't make sense. So Justin's argument, I read, his quotes today about why he doesn't want to decriminalize immediately because it does nothing to make sure that kids can't get their hands on it. That's what he said. But that doesn't make any sense because it has no bearing on whether kids get their hands on it or not, whether adults are being prosecuted for this. So it doesn't relate to kids in any way. Besides that it's a cheap way of getting out of it. So no, I don't buy their whole argument on this one. But, they do say that they are going to legalize it, but it's going to take time. And that could take up to 2 years.
Right.
So,
well, what do you think also of their concept or their idea of moving this into the liquor store system? Because, they say, they already have it figured out with carding and all of these sorts of things. I mean, we pretty much called this in our film the Trudeau deception and said this is the model that they're going to attempt to use. To me, it doesn't make sense because, let's say you're a recovering alcoholic who's using cannabis as your medicine, and you've got to go in here and get your medicine from this place. I mean, what are your thoughts on that, and what other kind of systems could be better?
Well, I think this is kind of what at least the federal government has in mind to sort of get rid of the responsibility of it themselves and put it on to the hands of the provinces to decide. And then the provinces, like here in British Columbia, would decide, Christie would be like, yeah, the liquor stores can take care of it. So he's kind of diffusing it down to the provincial governments, and that's who will actually make the decision on who gets to do it in a lot of ways. And possibly the municipal governments will make decisions on that as well. I mean, if they do allow other governments to take part in that, that's kind of how it would go. Although the provincial government regulates the liquor and also the health concerns. So, if the government lets go of the whole thing, it would probably be on the provinces to deal with medical marijuana as well, which I think is a good thing. I actually think the federal government should stay out of it, and they should let the local governments deal with it, and that's for most issues. I don't like big governments making decisions out in Ottawa. I would much prefer that we can make a decision here ourselves about it. But, of course, we do have Christy Clark as our premier here, and we know that she's pretty friendly with the liquor people. And we've already seen here in the province of British Columbia, the Private Liquor Store Association folks get together with the BCGEU, which is the largest union of government employees, and they all want to be the ones who handle the marijuana in the province. I agree with you. I think it's a bad idea. I don't think that we should be associating liquor and pot, putting them in the same place and putting the stigmas that those two things hold together in some way. Pot is a completely different substance than alcohol. It's much less dangerous, and it shouldn't be in liquor stores. I mean, I don't mind. Honestly, when I look at it as a libertarian, I kind of think everybody should be able to sell it. Liquor stores too, anybody. My problem is with exclusivity. If there's a monopoly at the liquor stores, then no. Everybody should be allowed to sell it. If it happens to find its way into a liquor store because everybody's allowed to sell it, I'm okay with that. Then you have a choice whether you get it there or somewhere else. If you don't like booze, then you don't have to go there.
I'd agree. It is about choice. It should be a truly open, free market. But when the government is kind of pulling the strings and appointing guys like Bill Blair, I mean, this is just for, if any of the viewers are not aware, this is the former police chief of Toronto who was in charge during the G20, and this is one of the biggest violations of the Canadian Charter. Our rights have never been violated like that before in the history of Canada under this guy's watch. And this article here from Cannabis Culture, Canadian weed czar Bill Blair says that pot pardons are not on the table. Again, folks, this is the man who was in charge during the G20, and this is the guy who's Justin's appointing as his go-to guy. This is the drug czar, the point man. I don't really understand his logic there.
Well, and I don't really understand it either. And I mean, just G20 alone. I mean, if we're talking about not understanding things, I mean, what a brutal, brutal thing that was. I mean, that's, like you say, it's one of the worst things this country's ever seen, where the police were literally stomping on people who were singing the national anthem peacefully sitting on the ground, and they're coming through cracking skulls, and they have black vans pulling up, throwing young girls into the back of these vans and dragging them away, kicking and screaming, who knows where, to these like prisons that they had set up.
Yeah.
Man, brutal.
Cannabis Day, folks, in case you missed it, we have videos on our channel. We'll include links in the description of this video. But Jeremiah and myself were there, and boy, oh boy, did the police were ever heavy-handed at that one. They pretty much clamped down. It was. Yeah. I had never quite seen the police like tussle with a crowd quite like that.
It was very strange because I'm also the organizer of 420 and the Cannabis Day rally that happened. I'm one of the main organizers there. So we've had a very positive relationship with the city for the past 6 or 7 years at least since I've been the organizer. We've never had a problem. We go and meet with city officials. We go to the special events office and meet with fire, police people, the safety folks. We have an ambulance on site. You know, we have radios that we give to the police at our rallies and give to the fire people at our rallies. We work directly with them all the time. And so this Cannabis Day, it was kind of a strange situation where the city manager's office got involved for some reason, and who's now totally on our side, by the way. Strange. But during Cannabis Day, they didn't like us being there. They didn't want us to be there. And they told us that they were going to put construction fences around the art gallery, even though there was no construction happening there that day. And they did. And they blocked us from our regular spot there. And so we tried to do it around the back, which they told us would be fine. Right. Sort of. They didn't really like it. We told them we're not going anywhere, so they were doing everything they could. But they sent down an army of police before we even arrived on the scene. I get there at 5 a.m., and there's all these cops there, like, you know, dozens of them, patrolling the whole entire thing and standing like a big intimidating group right there. And for the rest of the day, they came into our rally, intimidating people, not allowing people to set up their booths. We had, you know, one guy from the city in there yelling at people, and they would like hover right over top of us, sticking their chests out, leaning right over people. And then Neil Magnuson, who's an activist and one of our organizers, volunteer organizers, who was, I guess, selling marijuana as we do. It's an open cannabis farmers market. We sell oodles of marijuana there. You know, at 420, we have over 300 booths set up selling marijuana openly, and the police are smiling and nodding and giving the thumbs up. So
that's another interesting aspect to this, is that it seems that years before on Cannabis Day, the police weren't really bothering you guys all that much.
Not at all.
All of a sudden, something changed this year.
Well, we're not sure exactly why it changed, but there were some personal conflicts with the city manager's office at the time. There were some things that were going back and forth, and they were being very aggressive towards us as activists, and we called them out on it, and I was not happy with it, and I kind of got in some personal friction with the city, who's now the city manager. He was a deputy at the time, and so we're not sure if that was involved in it at all, but it's possible. But now I have to say that the city manager's office has been very kind to us about 420. They're working with us. They're giving us a letter of comfort, or some sort of letter that we're not officially permitted ever at 420 or Cannabis Day. We have no permit to do what we do. But the city just gives us a letter that says, okay, go ahead. And that allows, I guess, for whatever legal concerns and other things, it kind of is a protector in a way. It's always been a protest. The people that show up at Cannabis Day and 420 are there protesting these bad laws. And we do it as an open form of, you know, civil disobedience. We sell marijuana as a form of civil disobedience because we don't believe that we shouldn't be allowed to sell marijuana because it's harmless. And so, you know, through the past 6 years, whatever, they weren't really screwing with that. But at Cannabis Day, wow, they sure went after Neil Magnuson, who was openly selling marijuana. They dived on him, sent a bunch of cops in, surrounded him, and it was quite a tussle. A bunch of people got involved. Other activists jumped in, and they threw a bunch of guys in the paddy wagon and dragged him away, and Neil still has charges that he's dealing with. Then what the police tried to say after the fact was that he was selling to minors. Which was ridiculous and almost demonstrably false based on all the video that's there showing that no minor ever came up to him. And in fact, the police have to do their submissions in the court case and give all the videos, and their video doesn't show anything like that. So yeah, there was that. But we hope that that's not going to happen at 420. I mean, we know that it's not actually, because we've been working directly with all of the offices involved. And now I know we're kind of going into a new subject here, but yeah, 420 has moved to Sunset Beach this year. We're going to move it. And so April 20th, where we were usually at the art gallery in the center of town, The art gallery is apparently legitimately going to be under construction now because they're tearing it. They're doing something to it. They're tearing the grounds down around it, and it's an old spot.
Yeah.
So the city says the entire thing will be surrounded, but we can move to a new location, and the city will be okay with that, and they will help us do whatever we need to do.
It seems like it's like a gray area there, but they're kind of letting it happen. But I love this, the notion of civil disobedience in order to show that, there's nothing wrong with cannabis. We've been talking about something here at Press for Truth for a while, and that's this concept that cannabis is potentially going to be the gateway to liberty, because we feel that this is one of those key issues that may wake up Canadians to realize when they see just how ridiculous this law is and how stupid it is that cannabis is illegal. Perhaps this will be that linchpin issue, that key issue to wake people up to all the other problems that we have with our government. So we often, call cannabis the gateway to liberty, because we hope that this is going to be the issue that's going to wake people up to the fact that, the government's not necessarily looking out for the best interests of their people. Would you agree, with that analysis?
Well, I've always thought that about cannabis, and as you say, it's the gateway drug, but the gateway to freeing your mind in many ways, and actually just showing you, it's funny, the government's insistence on prohibiting marijuana for all these years has completely worked against it in exactly the way you say. It literally shows kids that the government is full of crap, and that when a kid smokes pot and they realize that it's not that bad, then they realize the government's been lying to them this whole time.
Exactly.
And then they start questioning other things that the government said.
Yeah.
So in a way, it's completely ludicrous. If the government was really smart, they would have legalized it a long time ago.
Yeah.
And they wouldn't have that aspect of it at all.
Yeah.
And actually, then they'd be able to regulate and control it. It's the Wild West now.
Right.
And, there's a lot of, questionable reasons why they might have left it. I don't know if that's a whole other subject to get into, but the government does a lot of drug dealing itself, let's just say.
A lot of people, I think, are surprised that Canadians aren't necessarily leading the way. Like, we had to watch Colorado and Washington do this before us. Meanwhile, we're the ones who had the medical marijuana program in place since, 2000?
I know.
Why aren't we leading the charge?
It's crazy that a lot of Canadians feel like, man, where were we on this one?
Yeah.
The States has moved forward on this issue before we did. Like, Vancouver has always been one of the forefronts of the marijuana legalization movement, really, in pushing this stuff forward. Mark Emery and others, Canada's been on the cusp of this, really. And it's strange that, in the States, that's that ballot initiative system. Man, that really, if we had something, we do have something similar in a few provinces, but it's extremely difficult. We saw with Sensible BC trying to do something. But but of course you still have the federal government of the United States saying it's wrong.
Right.
But even Obama has kind of been leaning on let the banks process the funds from medical marijuana dispensaries. That was one big thing. He's been telling his agencies to stand down from busting people, and it looks like in the language that they've been using and what they've been talking about, they might be looking at descheduling this whole thing,
right?
Which would be huge, obviously. And that might be Obama's kind of like swan song or something, like who knows?
There's only
he
so
could be the
much-
Choom Gang president after all.
There's only so much you can ignore. I mean, I think the people are speaking, really. The people are, the market is speaking it for itself, and the people are, they want what they want, and they want legalization. So perhaps the Obamas of the world are jumping on the bandwagon, are starting to realize, okay, this is going to happen. It looks like the people are going to make it happen. Let's just ensure that we have our crony capitalist fat cat buddies who are going to get all the licensed LPs, right? And
well,
wipe out the mom and pops.
Yeah, that seems to be happening even more in Canada than the U.S. to me.
Right.
Here we have a lot of speculation on the way that the government's going to design its system, but we can look at some actual evidence and kind of make some speculations, I think, that might be, there's an interesting, the Liberal Party's CFO, Chief Financial Officer, was Chuck Rafisi, who was one of the founders of Tweed. So, I start to wonder when you get so many these bedfellows who are so tight, what is the idea of the government and where will they go with this? We've had Shoppers Drug Mart and London Drugs come out and say that they want a piece of the whole thing. So it could look pretty nasty if the Trudeaus of the world handed over to the LPs in some way.
Yeah.
You know, you might have other corporations and liquor stores and other people crying foul as well.
Yeah.
So, you know, in one way, these companies like the Shoppers Drug Marts might be an ally on that end to us.
Right.
Because, hey, they want to pay everybody. It should be fair for all of them.
Why
should the LPs have it? These LPs are a disaster.
Yeah.
I mean, these LPs are totally wrong on every level. And that's why the judge kind of threw out a lot of this stuff, was that, you know, forcing the patients to buy from LPs is not a good way, is not a good system. And it, as he found, it infringes on their rights specifically. And he said the actual principles of fundamental justice that it's infringing upon, he said, the judge said it's arbitrary. So because there's no danger from the grow-ops themselves, with mold or fire or these other things, that itself is too arbitrary to put this rule on them and say nobody can grow because there might be a few fires or whatever. So arbitrary, that's one of them. And the other one, overbreadth. He said even if it's true that there are fires and mold, it's sense to make sure that everybody can't grow. You should have a system that, you know, people could come and look at it, and an electrician could check it out. Even somebody from Health Canada could come and check it out and make sure that the system works. Yeah. That would be better. That would not be overbreadth. That would be helping the people who need to grow and helping the government figure out a system that works for them as well. So they didn't do that, though. They just decided to throw it all out. And this was Harper at the time, of course, Health Canada under Rona Ambrose and these other clowns. So yeah, they went the distance. They were trying to do everything they could. Yeah. And it was obviously too much for the courts.
Right. Yeah. Well, I've seen it with my own eyes, actually. I know people who have tried to become an LP and have spent millions of dollars. I know one guy who spent $500,000 on a security system alone, and he was sent through tons of bureaucratic BS back and forth. Oh, you didn't include a diagram of the fence on page 17 here. Right. And he had to resubmit it, and then it comes back and forth. 6 months goes by. They make it impossible for the guy. Meanwhile, I met another man who's applying for an LP, and this is a Sri Lankan businessman who knows nothing about cultivating marijuana. So step one, apply to the government for the LP. Step two, learn how to grow cannabis. I mean, these LP guys are, some of them are just businessmen seeing an opportunity and wanting to get in on the ground floor of a big market. And what concerns me, though, is the taking over of the mom and pops who built the BC Bud brand. You know, the people here in British Columbia who over the last couple of decades have created these strains, built these buds, and are going to potentially get shut down and everything given over to the LP. I guess that's where Allard comes in, and to bring it back, and that's why this case is so important, is that these guys currently have the right to continue to do this, and you don't have to go to the LPs. So just, I guess, bringing it back to Allard, I mean, we have 6 months. Where do we go from here? I mean, what would you like to see come of this, let's say, in 6 months from now? And before I get on to that, sorry guys, we did have Chad Jackett as a guest lined up. Unfortunately, couldn't make it, and I want to remind you to share the link. I always forget to tell people at the beginning of the show, but share the link. That's how people are going to watch this and tune in live. Share it right now. And unfortunately, Chad couldn't tune in. I forgot to mention at the beginning of the show. But yeah, getting back to just touching up on Allard, what do you hope to see in the future in regards to you know, how this may play out in 6 months from now?
Well, for me, I mean, I think there needs to be, this is a medical case, first of all. So, and the judge was very clear in his finding, and he says it right at the beginning of his reasons for judgment, that this is for medical stuff. It's not for recreational. It doesn't necessarily apply to recreational at all. And I think that's important because we want to keep a distinction between the medical marijuana program and any recreational program that we have. And I think in places where they've kind of decided to throw out the medical program because they're going to make it recreational, there's been problems, like in Washington State. And a lot of patients are not happy with this recreational regulation, and because it doesn't necessarily account for their needs necessarily. So, and you know, like some of these needs, for instance, are more plants than a regular recreational user might need, or, you know, access to certain strains and these other things that you might not be able to get from your local dispensary. So there has to be, according to the judge now, the judge in his findings really shows that the home growing is essential. The home growing is important, because even if you can go down the street and get it from a dispensary, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be able to grow your own strain that's good for you, or you might not be able to afford it, or you might not be able to get out of the house to go get it.
Right.
So there's a bunch of different reasons. And actually he says in his findings that the money part of it isn't necessarily important as a standalone issue. So we weren't judging that in this case, whether or not these people can't afford to go to the LPs or something like that. What we were doing was showing whether or not there were barriers, and if those barriers were necessary, and the barriers that the government was putting onto people, were they necessary enough to stop some sort of danger that was happening? They weren't. Right. So I think what I'd like to see is that something that looks more like what the MMAR was in a lot of ways. So there's home growing involved for the patients. But, you know, the government has said they're going to legalize for recreational means. So I hope that whatever the recreational program is going to include home growing. Yeah. Maybe not as many as you might need for each individual case of a person who grows at home for their ailment. I mean, you know, some of them might need a lot. Like Remo, for instance, who he grows a lot and needs a lot, and these guys smoke a lot of pot because they're in pain or for whatever reasons. But yeah, so I mean, I need to see two tiers, I think, one for medical and one for recreational, and keep them distinct and separate. Yeah.
You know, I would have to agree. At the same time, though, I think it's important for people to understand that when you use cannabis recreationally, whether you know it or not, you're using it medicinally.
Right.
You know, you may be staving off some sort of, who knows what, future cancers, all kinds of problems that you may be protecting yourself against using it recreationally.
Sure. The holistic side of it.
Yeah.
That's a little different than going to a doctor if you have epilepsy or severe pain in some sense, right? But I agree. I think recreational is medicinal. And a good friend of mine, David Malmo Levine, would argue that, you know, depression, stress, and these things are helped in a huge way by marijuana, and those are things we all go through every day. You know, maybe I don't have any ailments because I smoke pot.
You're right.
And I'm not stressed and depressed because I smoke weed every day.
You know, coming home from a stressful day at work and smoking a joint to relax or something is medicinal in the sense that you are relieving yourself of stress. I mean, a doctor would suggest a glass of wine a day as being healthy for your blood and for your calmness. You know, it's the same, essentially the same.
For sure. And yeah, I mean, people who smoke pot know that. I mean, this is why a lot of people choose marijuana over antidepressants, other things like that, you know? So, you know, people deal with stress every day, and yeah, medicinal is recreational as far as I'm concerned. But how that should be put into regulations and things might be, you know, there could be distinctions there that we do need to pay attention to.
That's the big question, really, when it comes to this. It does seem that legalization is inevitable. We are leading towards that. I suppose the question is how much regulation, who is going to be, you know, given the licenses to do this, and is it going to be beneficial for not only the patients of Canada, but all of Canadians and the entrepreneurs? Is it going to be a truly freely open market, or is it going to be super controlled, you know, by...
We like to call it the inclusive model, and that should be one, and as we said, where no monopolies exist. Really, everybody is allowed to participate, whether you're a new grower, old grower, whoever, where there's not these, you know, prohibitive expenses in getting involved in it. You know, the LP system itself wouldn't be that bad if it included the the MMPR system, if it included the home growing and these other things and was more open to allowing the little guys to get involved.
Sure.
You know, I'd support the big guys too. I don't care. If everybody's allowed to participate, then the big guys are cool too. You know, some people might want to buy from them.
Yeah.
You know,
exactly.
I can't say what grandma wants to do when she gets her medicine. Maybe she wants to buy it from Molson Cannabis or whoever.
Right.
But the option should be there for people, and that's what it's really about. It's not allowing somebody, whoever they are, to have a monopoly.
Yeah, exactly. The option needs to be there, and the ability for these entrepreneurs to be able to play along as well and not get squashed out.
Right. So the mom and pop should be there too, because they grow good cannabis. And as we found, these LPs who are, you know, irradiating the cannabis with gamma radiation or doing all these weird things to it. Yeah. That's not the kind of weed I want to smoke.
Last week on our show, we did a little bit of an unboxing of some government weed. I was telling you a little bit about it. And it was from Tweed, I think. Or was it Tilray? Yes, Tweed. It was from Tweed, and the strain was called Brown.
Brown
is the name, and that just goes to show you how little they understand about their very own market that they're trying to promote their products to. That they don't even understand. That
when you just call it shit,
you might as well.
Or call like what brown weed? That's not really something we associate with good weed usually. Yeah.
And I mean, this is apparently medical grade cannabis coming from the government. But you compare that with any number of BC growers who have licenses from Health Canada and are producing cannabis. You compare this to what the government is producing, and it's really it's a no-brainer.
Well, it's hard when again they're trying to. As part of the MMPR, there's all these restraints and restrictions and things, but you notice they're going with this consistency thing, where they're trying to put a certain, consistent number of THC into they have different categories. This one's 25, this one's, so they have to make it consistent. Well, that's extremely hard when you're dealing with a plant.
Yeah.
Even from bud to bud, there might not be the same levels of THC when you test these things.
Sure.
So how do you get it consistent? These guys bust it all up. Right. And then send it to you that way, or not all of them do that. I've seen some LP weed that's pretty decent. I saw some from Metrum that didn't look too bad. They come in a big pill bottle kind of thing. Yeah. And I was looking at it; it looked like the dispensary weed that I've seen here.
Right. Yeah.
And there's a few other places. Apparently, what's the other one from Toronto that Matt Murnaugh works for now? I'm forgetting. But there's some that have a half decent product.
Yeah.
But you never, again, it wouldn't matter if the LP weed was the best weed that I ever had in my life. That's not the issue.
Yeah.
The issue is that everybody should be allowed to be part of the system. And there's a lot of people, without the activists and the people who were breaking the law this entire time, there wouldn't be any of these systems.
Yeah.
There wouldn't be any LPs at all.
Absolutely.
So when you got the LPs, the CEO of Tweed coming out and saying all the dispensaries should be shut down, really? Give me a break. There wouldn't be a U without those guys.
That's right.
And then unfortunately we got artists like Snoop Dogg signing up. He's part owner of Tweed now or something.
I saw that. I saw him rocking a Tweed shirt, and it's like, man, do you know what you're supporting? I don't think you do, because if he saw Brown, maybe he would want to put his name behind it.
Yeah, exactly. No, I know. It's just one of those things. I think we're going to see the LPs kind of disappear over time, probably, as the new regulations get put in. I mean, there's probably going to be a lot of them that are around, but it won't be in the same, they won't have that monopoly, and so there won't be the huge interest in them in the same way that there is now. And even after the announcement in court, I guess their stock was dropping. That's what I read, anyways.
I heard.
That's not double checked, but
yeah. Well, the good news is, the Allard case decision is good news. It's really just prolonging it an extra 6 months, but even that is good news, because now for the next 6 months, these patients who were getting from the supply that they trust can continue to do so. So, it's a big win, I think, for us here in Canada.
Right.
And
well, the government has to come back with something better now, and it has to include this home growing, or it's just going to go straight back to court. They have to do it in the spirit of what the judge said.
Right.
And of course, because what the judge did say is that the MMPR itself had a goal of being there. Their goal was to reduce the risk to public health, security, and safety of Canadians, while significantly improving the way in which individuals access marijuana for medical purposes. And then the judge said it didn't do either of those things.
Yeah.
It didn't help public health in any way, and it definitely didn't give people better access to marijuana.
Yeah.
So the government has to come back with something that does that.
Right.
We'll see
I
if
like
they do.
that, but the only problem is, we're looking to the government to fix the problems of the government.
Always, that's the problem.
Yeah.
In Canada, we've never really had anything good legislated when it came to marijuana. There's never been good marijuana legislation at all.
Right.
It's all been through the courts.
Yeah.
It's all been forced upon the government, who went kicking and screaming into doing this.
Yeah.
So now we have a government talking like they're going to do something maybe somewhere down the road here.
Yeah.
They have promised to do it. But again, we have people still being arrested at dispensaries in Nanaimo. We had 16 people arrested. There's people, Good Weeds got shut down.
Yeah.
There's a lot going on, and there's people suffering now. So nobody should be arrested for this.
And like you said, in years from now, when everything is legalized, everything's decriminalized, and it's just a normal thing, these people are going to be looked at as heroes because they were doing it at a time when their lives were on the line. We have a very interesting story coming out in the next couple of days. Actually, when I was in Acapulco, I interviewed a couple who are facing 25 years in prison from the United States for making extracts to help his girlfriend's pain. And are now forced to be on the run and are living in Mexico on the run because, producing extracts for pain, facing 25 years because they're confused in this particular state. The charges are like as if they were operating a meth lab because they see the butane and the mixing of
Cannabis
chemicals
factory.
stuff. And they just don't understand dabs and extracts over there. So we have an exclusive story coming out on that in the next few days. And that just goes to show you who's this affecting, what kind of people this is going to affect. But back to this point that the people who are doing this now are the trailblazers, are the people who we need to support and get behind, because without them, we wouldn't have this the road paved towards legalization for us.
Definitely.
Right.
And I mean, right now, there's actually something that people can do. There's a petition that's being, an official petition of the, how the Parliament has its official petition process where you get it verified by an MP and then they'll comment on it. Well, there's a few guys from Sensible BC that have been working on one. Dana Larson has been working on it as well. And that's available right now at that government website and actually at legalizepetition.ca.
Okay.
If you go to legalizepetition.ca, I believe there's a link right to that petition.
Is he including a joint with every...
Dana, yes. That was Dana. He's got lots of plans, actually. I do a show called Cannabis Culture News Live every Friday on pot.tv. Dana was on my last show and was talking about his upcoming plans. And he's going to be sending out... He's got 1 million seeds. And he's going to be giving them all away and sending out seeds to everybody. And the reason that he's going to send them to them is if people agree to grow them in their front yard, backyard, or on their balcony or somewhere publicly. And so he's overgrowing the government. This is the concept. And Dana's just going to send out a ton of these seeds. So yeah, he's continuing. That kind of, the whole sending a bud to all the Liberal members of Parliament kind of had mixed opinions, mixed results.
Yeah.
Some of the Liberals were cool with it. Some of them said, "Oh, we're calling the police."
To me, it's back to that harmless civil disobedience that does a good job at making a good point.
Yeah.
Didn't harm anybody, and it made a good point.
And that's the thing about marijuana is it doesn't harm anyone.
Yeah.
So there's no reason for it to be prohibited in any way, especially not when you look at things like alcohol and pharmaceutical drugs and everything else we got in our society, coffee even. Geez.
I mean, it's a no-brainer.
When I don't have right now I'm getting a headache from not having my coffee. So.
Yeah. Jeremiah, I just wonder when we're going to be to the point where it's on par with, blueberries or tomatoes or something, and we just see it as something as a part of our everyday lives,
and a lot of people use the tomato model, and I think that I'm with that one. I like the tomato model, but I don't really think it's looking at the cultural aspects of marijuana when you consider it that way.
Yeah.
It's kind of like halfway tomato, halfway liquor model. Because again, with marijuana, there's this connoisseur's market for marijuana, where you're always going to have expensive pot, you're always going to have the gourmet markets and all this kind of stuff. And I mean, you probably have that for tomatoes too, but maybe I'm just not a culinary artist, so I don't know. But, it seems to
up
me...
your tomato sauce
That's
game.
right, exactly. No, I assume it'll be a lot like the liquor industry when it comes out, and you'll have both sides of it in that way, right? Will it ever be at the price of lettuce? Probably not, because people will pay more for it.
Right.
And if you have a market, it's the free market when people will pay something for something, you can charge that for it. So who knows? I mean, maybe one day when there's just, weed growing, coming out of every orifice everywhere, all over the place, who knows what'll happen then. But
yeah. Especially if Dana keeps up that campaign.
There you go.
Millions of seeds all over the place, popping up, plants everywhere.
To me, that's helpful, because if it goes into the hands of the liquor stores, I mean, look at the price of liquor in British Columbia. It's easy to brew your own beer and it's cheap at home, but when you go to the beer and wine store, it's not cheap in this province, and it's getting more expensive all the time.
Yeah.
So I don't want to see pot vice taxed to hell, like they do in Washington.
Yeah.
But that's part of why I think the government is going along with these things so much now, because they see the big ching, the payoff that's coming.
Exactly.
They can look at Colorado.
Yeah.
There's so much money down there. They're considering sending it back to people in the mail and stuff. Like, when politicians see that, they're like, "Whoo, baby."
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
They're going to try to figure out how to cash in.
Oh yeah.
So we need to figure out how to, do it in such a way that we're still going to have the right to at least grow.
Right.
At least grow
inclusive
at home.
model.
Yeah.
It needs to be an inclusive model. Everybody's got to have a shot at the table.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well said. I think that's really, in a nutshell, what it all comes down to. Everybody should have a shot at the table. Everybody should be allowed to play, and everybody should have the right to grow. Really, it's just a plan after all.
Yeah.
That has never hurt anyone.
I know. Imagine if the government was coming in because of this house plant right now, you know.
Yeah.
It's machine guns versus flowers when you really look at it.
Yeah.
And it doesn't make sense.
Yeah. So on that note, I mean, for viewers who want to learn more about the case, maybe there's some growers out there, maybe there's some medicinal users, maybe there's some just recreational users who are curious about where these laws are going to lead to. Where do they go to learn more from you guys? I know, you know, you're doing a lot. You got a lot of shows. Give the people the links and where they can go to learn more from you.
Well, you can find pretty much everything we do at cannabisculture.com and pot.tv. And, you know, everything finds its way onto some of those pages somewhere. We have our Facebooks and Twitters and all that stuff out there. Yeah. But yeah, and as I said, check out that legalizedpetition.ca site. That's one we're pushing people to right now because we really want people to get on top of this issue. Moratorium on arrests. Nobody should be arrested for cannabis in Canada anymore, at least for simple possession. Yeah. That's, you know, the government. This is where it gets a little interesting, is because the government has only committed to legalizing for simple possession, not necessarily growing marijuana and what that might entail, right? So we'll see if they do that. Also, if you want to volunteer for 420, tonight I'll have a volunteer for 420 post for all across Canada. If you're anywhere in Canada and you want to volunteer for a 420 event, we have the big list, and I take all the info that anybody who signs up and send it to the appropriate parties across the country. There's, you know, a bunch of different 420s happening, Toronto and elsewhere. So if you guys want to get involved in that, and right here in Vancouver, please, we need volunteers. It's going to be the biggest 420 ever. We're moving. We need a lot of help. So you can go to cannabisculture.com tonight for that post, or right now you can go to cannabisculture.nationbuilder.com and sign up at our 420 tab, or just go to 420vancouver.com if you're here in the city and sign up there too.
Fantastic. Yeah, exciting stuff. I mean, again, we're leading in the right direction, and it's exciting times to be involved with this the fight for cannabis legalization in here. So again, thank you for joining us. And I want to thank you guys for joining us again this week. We'll be back right here, same time, same channel next week. And thanks again for tuning in, guys. Until then, keep fighting the good fight.